Oh, thank God you came back. Welcome to the second ever episode of Character Study, where I take a video game character as a jumping off point for some weird discussion that hopefully has something to do with the character themselves. Episode 1 on Olimar was very well received, thank you very much. So now I have a long list of topics that I want to finally bring to light. Of course, I've wanted to do this series so long, many of my topics are profoundly outdated. But that doesn't mean there's not some relevance I can extract. The concept of this video came to me back in late 2015 when I was fairly into Street Fighter. I didn't grow up with it, it's something I finally tried in my teen years with the Wii's Virtual Console. Then I tried to keep current with Street Fighter 4. I wasn't very good, more of a Smash Brothers person I guess, but I still had a lot of love for the diverse cast of characters the games had collected from around the world. Ultra Street Fighter 4 boasts a massive 44 playable pugilists. Then at E3 2015, disaster struck. Street Fighter V was announced, which seemed premature to me at the time. 4 had just recently achieved its Ultra form and they were already moving to a new Roman numeral. It was stated from the get-go that we'd be working with a much leaner roster, at least at launch. There would be a lot of cuts, even longtime favorites weren't safe. Over the next few months we were teased with character trailers. Of course Ryu and Chun-Li were back, then Charlie Nash, who, since we knew the roster was staying small, seemed to confirm that a similar character, Guile, wouldn't be making the roster. We were right. Ken was back, but with significant alterations to distinguish him more from Ryu. Some new faces joined them, and to my surprise some returning characters who hadn't been seen since before Street Fighter 4, mainly Karin and Mika. Knowing how small the roster would be, I wondered if Mika's inclusion meant we'd filled our quota on wrestling grapple-based characters. But then, on October 1st, 2015, hope returned to the people. A new trailer for Zangief, Hero of Russia, in all his glory. And unlike Ken, Vega, or Dalsim, he had no dramatic changes to his original outfit or design. He was as muscly and half-naked as his first appearance in 1991. I remember other influences in the fighting game community breathing a sigh of relief. People like Maximilian Dude and Lythero agreeing that maybe we shouldn't be surprised.
You can't have a Street Fighter game without certain characters like Ken, Ryu, like Chun-Li and Zangief, which makes sense.
It's just not Street Fighter without Gief. And that got me thinking, yes, in 5 years I'll make a video about this feeling I'm having right now. A Zangief appreciation video. I mean, everyone loves Gief. Even people who've never played Street Fighter love Gief. He's a Disney character, for God's sake.
And I say, Zangief, you are a bad guy. But this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Wait, bad guy? Bad guy? Did I miss something? Gief, you're neither of those things. Did I get something wrong? Or did a $165 million Disney movie completely miss the point of this character? It's time to grapple with the big issues, so I've compiled 3 questions. What makes Zangief a mainstay in Street Fighter? Why does Zangief look exactly the same in every iteration while other characters get redesigns? And why do people seem to think that Zangief is a bad guy? This may seem like a netcast wide, but I feel like the answers all tie into each other in an interesting knot. So without further ado, it's time to take a closer look at the Red Cyclone. And I know like 1,000 people corrected me already. The correct way to pronounce his name would be Zangief, but come on, it's Gief. It's always been Gief.
Presented by ComicFoil. Welcome to Character Study. Choose your character. Zangief. Game set.
Before we talk about Zangief, we have to talk about Street Fighter, arguably the most impactful series in the fighting game genre. In the 80s, the fighting game genre was struggling to come into existence. No one was sure yet how to translate the tension of a one-on-one confrontation into a video game. Arcade wizard Capcom tried its hand with the first ever Street Fighter game, which isn't very good. Sure, it has health bars, special moves with crazy button inputs, and a colorful cast of fighters that you can't play as, but it's not something to seek out unless you're obscenely curious. Rather than blindly repeating their experiment, Capcom took a step back with a slightly different concept, a beat-em-up originally called Street Fighter 89, which was renamed Final Fight before release. With Final Fight giving them a better idea of how to make satisfying movement and attack options, Capcom released Street Fighter 2 in arcades in 1991, and the fighting game genre was at last fully realized. We really can't overstate the innovation this game brought. Not only did an unintentional glitch introduce the concept of chaining attacks, Street Fighter 2 also gave you the remarkable option to choose your own character from a massive selection of 8. These men and women of legend became known as the World Warriors, champions from all around the world with mostly unique playstyles that serve as the fathers and mother of future fighting game archetypes. Ryu is what is now known as a Shoto character, easy to learn with a simple toolset for all occasions. Ken is an exact clone of Ryu, which in its way is also a fighting game tradition. Chun-Li is the light and speedy type, Guile and Blanca are charge characters, E Honda is a bruiser, Dalzim is a keep away zoner. And what about Zangief? Visually, he's the big guy, the slow but strong slugger, and that's certainly part of it. Standing 7 feet tall and 400 pounds, he towers over the rest of the playable cast. But Zangief also serves as the best example of Street Fighter II's other most revolutionary invention, grappling. In Street Fighter I, you could attack or you could block. Blocking worked on basically all attacks, protecting you from some or perhaps all of the damage. It was a pretty dull proceeding, two morons holding up their arms and occasionally risking a punch, hoping the other might trip up. It leads to a lot of stall tactics, or what we call turtling. No fun. With grapples, you can grab an opponent even if they're blocking and dish out some major pain, though most attacks are fast enough to interrupt an attempted grab. So now fights had a rock-paper-scissors relationship of attacks beating grapples, grapples beating blocks, and blocks beating attacks. 3 ancient truths in the fighting game's circle of life. All characters have at least one form of command grab, but Zangief, he's history's first grappler, a character focused around getting these grabs with longer range and bigger damage output, and it is glorious. With this playstyle in mind, Zangief's visual design goes from memorable to actually kind of brilliant, and back in the day it made him really stand out. Zangief is a lot, wearing as little as possible with rippling muscles and verdant forests of chest and shin hair. Now imagine playing Street Fighter II back in the 90s, with no other fighting games to draw literacy from, and there's this shirtless behemoth performing double lariats at you. You might be scared into blocking more than you really have to. And check the chart. What's the worst thing you can do against a grappler? Overblock. Now your fears have been legitimized in the form of an atomic pile driver and the exodus of half your health bar. Of course, with a little bit of work, I could probably give equal praise to all of the World Warriors. This game is pretty well balanced for its time, but moving forward, these characters would have to share screen time with more and more challengers. Street Fighter II is infamous for its plethora of re-releases, each title more ridiculous than the last, but it did mean new playable characters. The 4 bosses of the vanilla game would become playable, plus new challengers like fan favorite Cammy and fellow grappler T-Hawk. But eventually the time came for sequels, and this is where things get interesting. Here, the Street Fighter series splintered into 3 sub-series, each having multiple iterations much like Street Fighter II, not to mention spin-offs. So let's scan for Gief. First was Street Fighter Alpha. Narratively, it's a prequel to Street Fighter II, though effectively it just means new characters and mechanics. At first there was a surprising lack of Gief, with Birdie filling the role of the big guy that grabs people, but this was quickly amended for Alpha 2 and 3. Next we have the oft-forgot Street Fighter EX games, co-developed by Eureka and giving Street Fighter a very primitive polygonal look. Best thing I can say about it, it had Gief from the get-go. Finally, we have Street Fighter III, the true sequel, and, after a couple upgrades, considered by many to be the best in the series. And if anybody ever asks you what Street Fighter would be without Gief, well, it'd be this. I know, it hurts me too, but I guess I'm not surprised. Street Fighter III boasts a mostly original cast, meant as a completely fresh slate for the series. It even had a dedicated grappler, Alex, who was envisioned to be the game's central character, but as a last-minute marketing decision, Capcom added Ryu and Ken so as to prove that this was, in fact, a Street Fighter game. Only the series heroine Chun-Li and the big bad Akuma would join them by the final version. This period of a constantly rotating cast meant that different players would grow attached to different characters, with only Ryu, Blonde Ryu, and Chun-Li being assured appearances. I think it's also prudent to consider spin-offs. There's the Capcom vs. SNK crossovers, throughout which Zangief is almost always present, and there's the most famous Capcom crossover, the Marvel vs. Capcom series. See, in the 90s, Capcom also made an X-Men fighting game, so a Street Fighter vs. X-Men game just made sense. As a follow-up, the concept was expanded to Marvel vs. Capcom, but now with characters from Avengers, Spider-Man, Darkstalkers, and Mega Man being included, the Street Fighter roster had to be shaved down to the essentials. And who did they pick? Ryu, Chun-Li, and Zangief. Now that is an honor. It makes sense to have your main character, and Chun-Li is often included as the lead actress of the franchise. But why Zangief? I have to assume a combination of popularity and the grapple-focused moveset he brings to the table. He'd be back for MVC 2, and then dropped in MVC 3. Which is sad, but I think I get it. MVC 3 was again trying to keep out any characters that would feel redundant, and rather than keeping Zangief, they added Mike Hagar from Final Fight, who's practically the same fighter, just representing a different series. The cream of the crop, though, is Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, which gets 2 Giefs. Regular Gief and Mech Zangief. Oh my god. Let this be a preview for the lunacy Zangief will become. With the franchise now a tangled mess of spaghetti, Capcom decided to bring Street Fighter into the HD era with Street Fighter 4, funneling in characters from all sides of the franchise. First order of business, get the World Warrior 8 back together. This was their way of saying, hey, this is the definitive Street Fighter you should be playing from now on, re-releases notwithstanding. And then we have Street Fighter V's cutthroat selection process, which I talked about before. So in the initial launch, Zangief is in the surviving 5 out of the World Warrior 8, only 3 of which didn't need to be visually updated. Again, that's Ryu, Chun-Li, and Gief. Dalsim's got the cool new beard, and Ken's got, well, I'm just gonna say it, he looks better in Smash Bros. Eventually, the remaining 3 originals would join the roster through DLC, Guile in new clothes, and while Blanca and Honda are in their original garb, they also were released after they added story mode. I feel like since Capcom didn't need you to take them seriously in the story mode cutscenes, they just went for the nostalgic look to sell DLC. But again, Zangief's in story mode and his tried and true lack of outfit. While other designs work to justify these oddball 90s characters, Gief just adds more Gief. Zooming in more to that fierce scowl, his hyper combos just prouder than ever. Is the design just that good? I mean, I love it, as do many others, but why? Well, all of this so far has been what Zangief is, where Zangief is. We've yet to really explore who Zangief is. Continuity can be tough in a series like Street Fighter. In each game, each character has a story. When a new game comes out, it needs to decide which of the previous game's dozens of stories are canon, the others get scrapped, and yet aspects of those stories are still referenced. So has Zangief ever defeated M. Bison himself? Canonically, no. All you can count on is a character's origin story, and Gief doesn't have much in the baggage department. He isn't trying to avenge his master or his father, he doesn't have a rivalry with any particular character, so why does he fight? Mostly because he likes to. What he lacks in story, Zangief makes up for in personality. The closest thing he has to an ideology is the idea of muscle spirit. In a rather Taoist outlook, Zangief equates exercise and physical well-being as a major pillar of health. If your body is clear, it's easier for your mind and your soul to be clear as well. Zangief chooses to attain that by bodybuilding. To him, muscle mass is the clearest indicator of how hard you've worked, and how dependable you can be to your loved ones. They don't just grant physical strength. To Zangief, muscles hold a power all their own. Muscle spirit. Zangief is very proud of the mountainous body he's achieved, which is why he's so shameless in his Crimson Speedo. He flexes a lot, he celebrates himself in victory, but that isn't to say he's narcissistic. Because he's living his chosen lifestyle, Zangief can take a loss less personally than other characters who have more on the line. And historically, Zangief is one of the fastest to make friends with anyone he's finished trading blows with. Most famously with R. Mika, a Japanese wrestler with a considerably different style than him. Zangief is set in his ways. He's not going to change. But he's quick to embrace those who are different. And I don't mean because embracing is his main form of attack. Though I guess Zangief hasn't always fought purely for himself. In his first appearance, the instruction book states that Zangief is fighting for the glory of his homeland, Russia. And in 1991, that meant the Soviet Union. This is where we get into some misconceptions with the otherwise congenial Zangief. Yes, Zangief is Russian. Very Russian. In fact, his name was originally going to be Vodka Gobalski. Now, I don't think Zangief's designer, Akira Yasuda, meant any harm in this. Having grown up pretty close to Russia, Yasuda states that for a game about international champions, he wanted the USSR's warrior to represent the Union's strength. He was inspired by a Russian symbol, the Kodiak bear. Like its people, it is large and mighty, and can endure whatever the harsh north throws at it. You can see this in Zangief's thick hair. Also, it's stated on multiple occasions that Zangief's favorite form of training is bear wrestling. Zangief's fighting style is heavily inspired by the art of Sambo, which has its own extensive history. Sambo was developed in the 1920s, mainly by Vasily Oshchakov, an honored coach of the USSR who spent his younger days studying theology and culture in Japan. He combined judo and jiu-jitsu with more indigenous Russian disciplines to create a martial art based around throws, groundwork, and submissions. Sound familiar? Sambo became a USSR national sport in 1938, and was also implemented into training of police and military, adding punches, kicks, headbutts, shoulders, and knees into the mix when outside the ring. Never chokes though, which is a point of accuracy I appreciate with Zangief. When he puts you into a submission, he'll force you to tap out through the pain, but he'll never resort to actual suffocation. Zangief has his boundaries. Besides the Ursine influence in his design, Zangief's final look was modeled after Ivan Karlov, who fought in the International Wrestling Association under the title The Russian Bear. Does it get any more Russian than that? Well, yeah, a lot more actually, because Karlov wasn't really Russian. He was Canadian. His birth name was Oriel Donald Perra. But in professional wrestling, you gotta develop a marketable persona. And one way is to choose a foreign country, preferably one that the audience fears and perhaps even hates a little. Zangief's greatest inspiration was only Russian because his audience wanted a villain. And for a while in the 90s, it seems that's what Zangief's audience wanted too. So, is Zangief a villain? Taking all of his story modes and all of the games he appears in, the answer is absolutely not. Granted, the friendlier parts of his personality didn't materialize until Alpha 3, but even in his first appearance, Zangief was just a dedicated wrestler who wanted to represent his country. The problem is, that country was Russia. Russians haven't been treated too kindly in Western media, especially not from the 60s through the 90s. I hope I don't have to explain to you what the Cold War is, but in the briefest of terms, it was a long period of opposition between the US and the Soviet Union, largely because they had such contrasting systems of government, and both sides had power of nuclear weaponry. So for 30 years, the two sides fought in every way except the literal. We fought over other countries like Vietnam and Korea. We fought a scientific war to be the first to the moon. We fought a war of culture, all loaded with the anxiety of the Cold War, knowing that at any time the press of a button could ensure mutual destruction for the entire world. Like in the Olimar video, it's important for me to clarify that Street Fighter and Zangief are creations of Japan, not the US. Japan's relationship with the USSR is a little more nuanced, but they were aligned with the USA in most matters, so it stands to reason that some of these sentiments were at least circulating near the production of Street Fighter 2. And yet, Street Fighter 2 has a gallery of villains, and Zangief clearly isn't one of them. Zangief is very intimidating, and his stage in the USSR is a steel hellscape of weapons manufacturing. But when you actually see the Soviet leaders in Zangief's ending, this happens. That's Gorbachev, by the way. Yes, that Gorbachev. Feared leader of the Union that will supposedly wipe out all life on the planet. Well, it is 1991. By this point, the USSR's influence over the world has waned tremendously. The Union would disband due to economic collapse less than a year after this game's release. It's as if Capcom is saying, hey, the Soviet Union is nothing to worry about. Keith's just here to have a good time. But then Street Fighter got extremely popular, sporting several adaptations, and Zangief's better aspects disappear in any project where Capcom isn't directly involved. In the US, we were used to seeing certain tropes for Russian characters in films. Russians are the enemies. Maybe they're spies trying to take our secrets. Maybe they're scientists using unethical means to get a leg up on the arms race. Any loss to them is a loss to American morale, be it in hockey, chess, or of course, boxing. Yeah, my first thought here is always Ivan Drago, inhumanly tall antagonist of Rocky IV. Because if Russians aren't smart and evil, they're big and stupid. And evil. Come to think of it, there are a lot of giant Russian henchmen in film. It's kind of a thing. I've actually been combing some message boards, and while I don't really have any hard citations for this, it seems a lot of Russians have an impression that Americans are all big muscleheads. How did we both get the same stereotype of each other? I think maybe it's because of the Olympics, which would be a battleground between the two nations' egos for decades. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for American and Soviet public to actually see each other outside of these highly televised events, so this is who we had to represent both parties in the public eye. And what events was Russia leading the world in? Weightlifting, wrestling, and canoeing. All sports for big, brawny men. Also ice skating and gymnastics, but that iconography is saved for the Russian femme fatale tropes. So quick run through Zangief's filmography. In the 1994 American live-action film, Zangief appears as one of M. Bison's subordinates, only because he is too stupid to realize Bison is the bad guy. He changes sides in the end, but only after realizing that he might not get paid. This is actually one of the kinder adaptations. The American cartoon series, hilarious mess that it is, also features him as a recurring lackey. The anime Street Fighter 2V, not to be confused with Street Fighter 5, depicts Zangief as a little more good-natured, but still employed to the evil Bison. And in the Street Fighter Alpha special, he's snarling and lacking any sense of humanity. I think it's fair to say that in making all of these features, the writers weren't as concerned with accurately adapting Zangief as they were with Ryu or Guile or whoever the main hero was. So they just sort of defaulted Zangief to how they were used to seeing characters like him. Big, Soviet, he must be a bad guy. And that's hardly fair. You know who else is probably a Soviet in this time period? Chun-Li, and we never have questions about her virtue. Maybe the place you're from and its system of government doesn't define you as good or evil. Which brings us to the interesting case of 2012's Wreck-It Ralph. In an early scene, Zangief cameos in a support group for video game villains. And especially if this is supposed to be the video game version of Zangief, he shouldn't be a villain. I would be willing to overlook it. I mean, maybe he's just there as Bison's sponsor or something, but he outright says he's a villain. giving one of the most thematically critical lines in the movie. Is this another case of revisionist history framing Zangief as the bad guy? Did the staff forget Zangief's heroism because of the Red Scare? Actually, screenwriter Phil Johnston took full responsibility in an interview with Mandatory.
Because I grew up playing Street Fighter and Zangief was not a good guy. He was very mean to me, regularly. And in Zangief's Heart of Hearts, I know he has little remorse over some of the things he did to me personally.
Well, that's creative license for you. But that brings up an interesting point. Unless you chose Zangief as your character, you eventually had to fight him on your way through the game. If someone is an obstacle in your quest, does that not make him an antagonist? Not evil, but your enemy? This is an especially appropriate movie for this discussion, since villainy in Wreck-It Ralph is more of a day job. We have a Zangief who can hang it up at the end of the day and share a drink with the guy he just hospitalized. In an attempt to be metatextual, this is actually the most authentic portrayal of Zangief in film history. And in children's media at least, this transitions Zangief from one set of Russian character tropes to another. Generations of children have been born never knowing the fear of nuclear destruction. Well, not at the hands of Russia, at least. These kids are completely separated from that anti-Soviet propaganda. We've retained the big husky-rusky characters with their broken English and, if the ratings will allow, a love of vodka. But we've also added a boisterous charm and unshakable friendliness. The new Russian cartoon stereotype fights hard and parties hard. He loves his friends, and when the going gets tough, he's very excited to spill some blood and knock some heads. Then resume pleasantries when the fighting is done. Compared to Siberia, this is nothing. And that's kind of what Street Fighter was already doing with the character. You had a little bit of goofiness from the start. Once the Soviet Union fell, Zangief's next appearance in Alpha 2 kind of conflated the Soviet Union and Russia, but after that he was permanently registered as Russian. And Gorbachev himself, the character, not the actual man, begged Zangief to stop fighting for his country and start living for himself. And ever since then, he's been his same silly, sometimes terrifying self. Is this trope racist? I mean, yeah, very. But it's also a much more sympathetic character and catapults him from falsely labeled villain to comic relief hero. You got him teamed up with series punchline Rufus in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which is funny because one of them is all fat and the other is all muscle. You have the aforementioned Mechassault, and Street Fighter V Story Mode finally puts him in a long-term narrative with his intended personality traits. He's a force for good, bashing heads and loving every minute of it. He's certainly not complicated, but it leads to so many fist-pumping moments. Like when he tanks a Balrog punch, which supposedly is strong enough to kill an elephant, just by puffing out his pecs. Or this beautiful moment against Satsuki. She runs in with a sword, he goes to catch it, she's too fast, cut away, oh no, she got him! But wait.
What? That's incredible!
Muscle is stronger than blade. You look like you're worried about something, Hoffman. Fighting is the best thing to do when life gets you down. All right, I am going to help you. Quick, change the channel. Before all else, you must build muscle. Then you must become hero to children everywhere.
Wow! Zangief is so awesome! Go for it, Red Cyclone!
For Mother Russia and for my fans. Ultimate Atomic Buster!
Zangief is good guy. Will crush man's skull like sparrow's egg between thighs.
If I've managed to answer anything in this confused, rambling video, it's that Zangief is a lot of fun. So let's look back at those questions we posed at the beginning. The worst one first, why did adaptations keep making him evil? Because a lot of writers just didn't put in the effort to get to know the guy. They wanted a bad guy, and they thought they saw one, ignoring all of the context and nuance surrounding him. But maybe it's that initial misunderstanding that gave him his staying power. A lot of players grew up in fear of the Red Cyclone, but they got to know him better over time. They learned that he doesn't have to be so scary, and actually you can keep him back by spamming projectiles. And he's a really nice guy. As a fan base, our relationship with him is stronger because of the turmoil it had to weather. And as for being the most consistent character in Street Fighter, well, Zangief never had to change to stay fresh, because our understanding of him changed instead. With a new cultural lens of understanding him, what's old seems new, yet at the same time so essentially classic to the series. To think, all this time we thought Zangief was spinning, but he was just standing in place while the world revolved around him. Zangief represents a lot of things, not just muscle spirit. He's that creative ingenuity that started as just a big guy, but was developed into a type of character that helped change the mechanics of fighting games. He's a lesson on judging a book by its cover, but also keeping your distance because that book might pile drive you. He's the fear of what a country might be capable of, but a testament to the pride and power it still has. And he's an earnest lesson to love yourself, love what you do, and whatever that is, strive to be the best at it. Maybe you'll never be top tier, but you'll be the best you can be. Hey everyone, this is Comic again. I want to thank you all for watching this video, but I want to thank a few other people even more. This time around I had to get my footage from a variety of YouTubers that are much better at fighting games than me. I gave them credit throughout the video, but a few of them I'd like to reiterate are In-Between Gamer, Drew Tony Z, and Bizarro13. Just like last time, the voice in the title screen sequence is my good buddy the GreenScorpion, who coincidentally is also much better at video games than I am. I believe he should have a new countdown around this time. Watch it when it comes out. And if it already came out, watch it again. I also want to give a Zangief-sized thank you to Mechassault Man for being the voiceover for Phil Johnston. Mech has his own budding YouTube channel with an ongoing Let's Play of XCOM. It's got soldiers named after volunteers, a lot like my playthrough of Darkest Dungeon, or my playthrough of XCOM if you remember me doing that. Still, I recommend you watch Mech, who is more likely to actually finish his run than I am. Go give him some support. The character study logo is courtesy of Tales of Soljilo, the title song is Cascade by Kubbi, and if you want more from me, feel free to explore the channel. I have some Let's Plays, or you can watch my other character study on Captain Olimar. That's 2 down, I'm gonna get started on episode 3. I've got a ton of work to do.